Nam Rat Yin Min Tu Du, Yu Tu Du, Lao Hao Bien, Nong Guan, Kai Do Mat, Guan Si Am, Yo Kwao Ki, Hoi Kai, Hoi Dai Tang Lang Tong, Now Lang Mok Yong. The Vietnamese people deeply love independence, freedom and peace, but in the face of United States aggression, they had risen up, united as one man, Ho Chi Minh. The French entry into World War, like many other colonial and European powers for that matter, had brought colonial armies, and Vietnam was one of them. Maybe even more significant than the African colonies themselves, Cochin China. Many had volunteered and served in Europe, leading up to the riots throughout Cochin China. Almost 100,000 Vietnamese went to Europe to fight and serve on the French battlefront. They were conscripts and thousands of them lost their lives at the Somme and Piccadilly. Additionally, Vietnamese were in the Middle East as well, exposed to new political ideas and returning from a colonial occupation to their own country by a ruler that many of them had fought and died for, resulting in some of the sourest attitudes. Many of the troops sought out and joined Vietnamese nationalist movements focused on overthrowing the French. Throughout contacts in Europe and their writing, some acquired a taste for certain ideas of national autonomy, revolutionary struggle, and like that. Vietnam had actually contributed 184 million paristi in the form of loans and 336 tons of food. These burdens proved a lot heavier as agriculture was hard and hit hard by disasters from 1914 to 1917. Lacking nationwide organization, the Vietnamese national movement lacking a unified nationwide organization, the Vietnamese national movement, though still vigorous, failed to take advantage of the difficulties France was experiencing as a result of the war to seize any significant uprising. The scholar movement had declined while new social forces were not strong enough to promote large-scale campaigns. Both Vietnamese victories and losses in World War I battlefields contributed significantly to a Vietnamese national identity, such as Passchendaele, Anzac Cove, but let us focus on the Vietnamese. At the time, it was referred to the Vietnamese as bloody baptism under fire. A Vietnamese military death during World War I was made by a Russian journalist in 2004 in a handbook called The Human Losses in the 20th Century. Over 1,200 men died during the conflict. They fought and died on the French side. The Vietnamese also endured additional heavy taxes to pay for the French war effort, the horrific typhoons and hurricanes that ravaged the crops that they sent over 336,000 tons of food, and especially the loans of the paristi. A young Ho Chi Minh actually arrived in the United States, where he apparently stayed for a few more years. There was no doubt that he did menial work to support himself. While learning and absorbing the American language and culture, he actually acquired an affinity for the blacks in New York, Harlem in particular, when he declared independence for Vietnam on September the 2nd, 1945 in Hanoi. Hoi quotes and actually recited the American Declaration of Independence in 1945. The Tay Nang uprising in Vietnam, this is one of the many uprisings that happened in Vietnam. The Tay Hoang uprising, actually in 1917, was the most serious anti-French outbreak during World War I in any of the colonies. Out of all the colonies, the Tay Hoang was actually the most devastating anti-French uprising. It has been described as the largest and actually most successful and destructive at the same time anti-colonial rebellion in the French Indochina between the pacification of Tonkin in the 1880s and the Nay Thuong Revolt in 1930 to 1931. On August 30th, 1917, an election ban political prisoners, common criminals, and insubordinate prison guards mutinied in Thanh Hoa Penitentiary, the largest one in the region. The rebels came from over 30 provinces and, according to estimates, involving at some roughly 300 citizens, 200 ex-prisoners, and 130 prison guards took place in this riot. The initial success of the rebels was short-lived as they were managed to be controlled by the prison and town's administrative building in 6 days, but all expelled in the 7th day by the French government reinforcements. According to French reports, 107 people were killed in the colony side and 56 of the anti-colonial side, including Quaino. French police forces were not able to pacify the surrounding countryside until 6 months later. Can reportedly committed suicide in January 1980 to avoid capture. Both Quen and Kang have since been accorded legendary status as national heroes. So there you go. That's basically it. The only notable Vietnamese, and I don't mean to say this like the only Vietnamese that matters, because you heard Ho Chi Minh already. The V, which is actually the first Vietnamese pilot to ever fly in an aircraft. Currently, he does not have a wiki page, but if we could come together as a community and try and find out who Do Hu Bai was, hopefully we can make that a possibility and share his story. Because to tell you the truth, you'll be like, oh, what about this guy who was in the Vietnam War? So I was looking at all the guys. The only one to actually come forth, at least go into that age group of 1890 to 1901, was actually Sing Mun Free. So notable Vietnamese were, yeah, so if we can help. But you'll be like, the Vietnam War, what about No Dinh Bien or Ly Dang or Bao Nhat Quai Gap or even Van Thi Duong? Well, most of these people were born around 1930, 1940. Remember, Vietnam is 1960, 1955 even to 1975. So for them to be around since 1890, they'd be pretty much as old as Ho, which is about 80 when he died in 1980. So most of these people were born around or during World War One. The only notable person to actually could have served in the army, but he didn't, is Nai Dinh Diem, which is actually the first president of South Vietnam. He was born in 1901, but most of the generals were born between 1907 to 1923, because remember this goes up into the 80s. This is Cold War stuff, so if they were born in 1890s, they would be pretty much as old as Ho. And actually, if they were actually born during World War One and fought in World War One, they could have been more nationalistic, but at the same time, they could have been stuck in the old. So the fact that they were born around World War II, that kind of Cold War era, meant that they were exposed to more actual good ideas than actually mass charge and mass infantry, even though they had bayonets on their AKs and M16s to reference that. But I couldn't really find no one that was born around the time. I think JFK was born around that kind of time, but he did not serve in the army. But he was actually born on May 29th, 1917. So most of the people from Vietnam, like Robert McNamara, John F. Kennedy, L.B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, Nai Hang Tu Hoa, and Nguyen Van Ninh, were actually pretty much born in like a couple of years before World War One. So even if they were born before World War One, they were like 16, 17, 10 the least. So that's pretty much it. So the only notable person here is Ho Chi Minh and Lo Dat Vinh. I believe that I stated his name correctly. Lo Dat Vinh. Do Hu Vinh. So the only notable people from Vietnam are Do Hu Vinh and Ho Chi Minh. So that's pretty much all the Vietnamese I have for you. So next week we should hopefully do Equatorial Africa and the African colonies of France. But I just wanted to start out with Vietnam because even though Africa doesn't get a lot of love, I think they given the most manpower, so they get a little bit of the history books. But Vietnam really got any part of the history books. The only part they got was the Vietnam War, and even then it was north-south, and then the South would ride, and so given a little World War context and how the Vietnamese War actually start. Because remember, the World War is the root of all modern conflicts, new or old, from Syria. So from Syria, Algeria, Papua New Guinea, Gambia, Vietnam, Kochi, China, French India, the Indian partition of Pakistan and India, resulting in over 1 million people being killed, border crossing, back and forth, Muslim, Hindu. So World War One is pretty much the root, the downfall of empires, the collision of war, capitalism versus socialism, socialism, capitalism versus fascism. So World War One is the root. I shouldn't say of all evil, but it is the war that was unresolved that led to more wars. So that's pretty much it. But Vietnam has been actually left out of the history books besides Vietnam War. So I was just trying to flex my muscles here. So next week we'll try and do Equatorial Africa and all of the African colonies. We'll do the Caribbean and we'll do a little bit more. We'll go back in Asia a little bit, but after this we'll pretty much wrap up France and then we'll do Belgium, I believe, which is the only minority report is the Belgian Congos, which is still pretty good, but I mean, yeah, that's the only thing they have. You could believe that, fun fact, the Belgian Congos are like 5,000 Belgiums, right? So, damn, like, how do you get a colony that big? But anyway, Leopold, we'll see each other on the battlefield, so hope you learned something, hope you have a deeper appreciation for Vietnamese, besides them being communists, and I hope you have a national fervor in Vietnam. And that's pretty much it. Learn something. How do I say goodbye in Vietnamese? And how you say goodbye in Vietnamese is tao bet. So tao bet. And I kind of sound like a racist caricature, but tao bet. Learn something.